Hey there gamers, I'm Pruitt, this is Jim Davis. Now this might seem like a normal episode of WebDM, but it actually could be a horrible monster here to kill you. Let me grab my monster manual and... Oh my god! Things beyond the normal expectation in a dungeon.
You're talking about things that look like other things, monsters that look like other things.
Yeah.
Monsters that look like other things.
Yeah,
I mean, so
right?
Mimic is the kind of the archetypal monster in this regard.
Yeah.
It's a weird creature, and maybe you're looking through the monster manual, and, you know, this is your first time playing Dungeons and Dragons, or you're just sort of flipping through it, and you're like, I'm going to read some monsters that I've never used before, never played with. You come across the Mimic, and you go, what a stupid monster.
Right.
It's just like
One would think.
One would think. And I would encourage DMs, if that's your first thought, to maybe reconsider it and think like, okay, what's the purpose of a monster that can look like any object? A chest, a door, a wardrobe, a trapdoor, a mirror. There's a bunch of other monsters that sort of fit in this general mold. Animated objects.
Right.
They're gonna be one of those. That's just a suit of armor. No, it's not. It walks down and fights you. Or a rug that tries to like smother
strangle you.
Right. Cloakers are another one of these monsters where it's like, okay, that's a cape hanging on the wall, or a torn tapestry that's kind of crumpled over. Oh God! Until it,
grabs your face and
and wraps itself around you.
Yeah.
And there's even sort of natural rock formation versions of these creatures: Dark Mantle, Piercer, and Roper. All of these taken together, these monsters that look like other objects, are, to me, they speak to a type of Dungeons and Dragons where these monsters are created in an environment where the DM is trying to come up with ways to keep his players surprised, on their toes, and not complacent in an otherwise empty dungeon environment where they might get careless and, foolhardy.
Like in Aliens when they show up and everything's just empty.
Empty, yeah.
Like that should be terrifying.
Right.
And there should be a reason for that.
Yeah.
Right? And these make a perfect monster for dungeons without monsters in it.
Right. I think you're hitting on something there that could be really interesting in terms of dungeon design. A lot of old school dungeons, there's a ton of empty space.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're designing the dungeons according to the rules laid out in the rule books, using a dungeon population table, you're rolling on it, and it's not like every room has something in it. There's a lot of rooms that are just empty, a lot of hallways that are empty, and so you get this sense that if you're exploring that place, the players might become really complacent, like, all right, we just went through 3 rooms, they were all empty, maybe they had a feature in them that we investigated, or some hidden treasure that we found. Maybe we dodged a wandering monster patrol or something, and then come across a room that's like an empty barracks or something like that. And we're just continuing along in this sort of casual, somebody's keeping an eye out, but we're gonna rummage through the stuff. And that's when the Cloaker hits. Yeah. That's when you touch the chest that's actually the Mimic, and it won't let go, and its giant tongue lashes out at you and attacks you.
Yeah.
That's what those monsters are for that moment where you think your players are a little too comfortable in this dungeon. Then you throw creatures at them that look like dungeon features in the environment. They're gonna look at an empty room or a room with just a bunch of objects in it in a much different way after they know that any place is dangerous in here.
It could be thought of as one of the reasons why the 10-foot pole exists.
Right.
Just go around just poking everything.
Poking everything, tap the floor, what's under this thing. Creak this door open. Yeah, it could be. And there's a style of play that's ultra cautious like that. It's like Bomb Squad D&D as they go through the dungeon. And like a lot of things in D&D, that taken to an extreme can make for some very boring sessions.
Yeah.
But you also don't want necessarily the party that doesn't treat the dungeon environment I hesitate to say with the respect it deserves, because it's just a dungeon, doesn't necessarily deserve any respect, but it is a dangerous environment.
Well, yeah, respect the situation that you're in.
Respect the situation, yeah.
I mean, this is a dungeon. They are living, breathing things, and you've said this many times, and they should always be changing.
And, they should always be changing. Yeah.
And it's just a great way to just have a change of pace,
Have a change of pace.
They went in, they cleared out all the goblins, and they're like, oh, there was something deeper. They go back in, they're going through a thing, oh, this is still empty. No, a bunch of other shit came in because they had to dispose of all the goblins. Yes. And then they just,
fix themselves to the ceiling or
hide over
moved in.
here,
And it's one of those things where if you're reusing the same dungeon, and this is why the mega dungeon concept, as opposed to a disposable dungeon or a delve, where it's like this dungeon has 6 to 7 rooms, and we go in, we clear it out, and we never return.
Right.
Where the mega dungeon is meant to be, this is the dungeon. You'll never clear it out.
Right.
There are 20-something levels to this thing, hundreds and hundreds of rooms, but it is the tent pole that holds up the campaign. And if the players are ever like, oh, what are we supposed to do? The answer is we go and foray into the dungeon. And so it rewards players for like, wait a second, when we went through this room the first time, there wasn't a chest in that corner. That's the kind of clue that a clever player will note that will then tell them, hey, we need to be careful around that. We don't know what that is.
But the inexperienced player is going to be like, ooh, treasure!
Ooh, treasure. There's just a chest that's sitting there, and then it comes after them.
Yeah.
That's sort of the environment you can use them in. Take a natural cave, for instance.
Yeah.
And the party's walking across it, stalactites, stalagmites. Maybe they're tracking a party of drow or something like that, or they think they're just in a natural cavern. And it isn't until they get halfway across that the roper attacks them, and the piercer starts scuttling over to slam down on them. And one of the dark mantles comes down and envelops them.
And then cast darkness.
Yeah, and then just sort of chaos and confusion reign as the party is not prepared for the type of ambush that they just suffered through. Yeah. And then it's like, if they escape, maybe they kill the monsters that are there, and then the cave becomes sort of empty again. Something nastier moves in.
Yeah.
That those piercers and ropers were sort of keeping at bay. Or maybe they leave that and escape this particular cave and just know, okay, this is the room that you got to be careful in, and then they use that to their advantage. They lure other enemies in there to be killed.
Exactly.
They can use the dungeon environment for their advantage if you're using the same dungeon environment over and over and over again.
Right. Why waste a resource when you can just go around it?
Go around it.
If they're only hanging out over here in one spot, well, maybe go by and feed them every now and again to keep them over there.
It's one of those things where these are monsters designed for a specific type of D&D that features the dungeon heavily. And if you're not running that kind of D&D, that kind of D&D where you stay in one dungeon, it's sort of regained a resurgence with the old school Renaissance, but for the most part, mainstream Dungeons & Dragons, dungeons are a thing you go into and you clear them out and then you're done.
Right.
Or maybe you go into them 2 or 3 times if it's an adventure like Princess of the Apocalypse, where it's built around dungeon crawling and you might revisit a location or something like that. But it's not that you go in one dungeon that's massive and sprawling and spend a lot of time there, particularly not like 10 or so levels in that one location, just kind of clearing it out. So
that can be fun, though.
That can be fun, and so that's what those monsters are there for. I'm glad that they're in 5th edition if you want to run that style.
Let's go back to the mimics.
Yeah.
And the cloakers, the things that look like objects.
The things that look like objects, yeah.
Mimics, they're sticky.
Yeah.
Like
adhesive.
They're adhesive. Like you only have to touch them, and boom, you're grappled.
Right, and up to huge creatures.
Which isn't anything.
Yeah.
But they don't. What's the DC to get away from it, though?
It's like 13 to get away from it, and so it's one of those things where I see that they're based around grappling, around trapping a creature that interacts with them, and sort of not letting go, and then they're not necessarily given the mechanical tools that allow them to do this, and so it seems like there's this weird half space between designing characters, or designing monsters that sort of adhere to a certain standard, or designing monsters that do a particular job. I don't know if that makes sense, where it's like,
no, I get
they need a high grapple check. It doesn't matter how they get it. They could get expertise in athletics. It could just be that you write in there athletics +8 or something, or however much you want that escape DC to be.
They do get advantage.
They get advantage. But the escape DC for you is still only 13.
Exactly.
And so some classes and characters it's going to be difficult for them to escape from. But others, DC 13 is going to be pretty trivial. So it really just depends. They're a low-level monster, but if you want to beef them up, then make escaping their adhesive grasp a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
And you can play up kind of the surprise sort of gotcha. And then panic that might come after that as the party's like, oh, what do we do?
Exactly. Now, cloakers, on the other hand, they're kind of a beast.
Kind of a beast, yeah. They're nothing to sneeze at, and a monster that's pretty nasty.
Exactly. They have actually a few. They're moan that can frighten people.
Right.
And they basically cast mirror image.
Right.
Can we just say that Why didn't the spell mirror image? Why wasn't it worded,
like that?
the entry for the fucking Cloaker, where it's just like roll randomly? Like, why do you have to do the whole like, well, if you have this many, you have to get a whatever below or whatever? Yeah. And it's just like, just roll randomly,
so
please.
It's a lot simpler than the actual mirror image spell. I get what you're saying, and I don't know why the mirror image spell is the way it is, but the Cloaker's ability is certainly once they're on the party, they have a ton of tools that allow them to mess with the party. So they're gonna get on you. Now they're taking like half damage, and you're harming your friend if you try to attack them.
Yeah.
This is a monster that you throw at maybe a somewhat inexperienced party, because they might be thinking like, oh, it's a monster. I hit monsters.
I killed it.
I kill them, and then it's like, oh wait, but it's also wrapped around your friend. You just hit you just hit it with a sword. They sometimes call them trick monsters. There's a trick to defeating them. There's a technique you have to use, and so you can throw it at a somewhat inexperienced party and watch and see what happens.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't lead to complete disaster, but it might keep them on their toes and certainly scare them a bit.
Now onto the more natural looking piercers, ropers, and dark mantles.
Yeah.
Piercers are just kind of,
they're just there. They're little like crustaceans that their shells look like stalactites and fall down off you and then kind of like munch on your corpse or something.
But even they take damage from their own attack. They take like half damage. So it's just like, it's like a dodo bird attacking you. They'll eventually be extinct.
They're really only dangerous if you start using them in the dozens. And it's like every creature on every stalactite on that ceiling is a piercer. And that's certainly, that's something to do if you want to.
Exactly.
But using them one or two at a time is probably not going to be that that deadly.
Now the ropers, on the other hand, that's some no shit right there. They get like 5 attacks, basically.
Yeah, and for a party that's in the first tier or even early second tier, a roper is something that can tie down a full party because of the number of attacks it gets.
Action economy.
The range at which it can start engaging the party, so it's sort of like it has the ability, chances are, at 25 to 30 feet, the party isn't really detecting or looking at what this thing is, so it's probably going to get the drop on them. It starts engaging them at range. All the while, the things that live on the ceiling are coming over to where the commotion is and start falling down on the party. That's sort of like the typical encounter I see with these things. But ropers can guard subterranean lairs.
Yeah.
Creatures might have their warren or lair or bastion sort of behind a roper cave that's sort of like in with that, and then what else is in with this roper cave? Maybe the cavern is filled with fungus like shriekers and violet fungi and things like that. So like this creates an environment that when the party sort of gets into the cavern, it's like, oh, it looks empty, fungus and geological formations, and then they get halfway through, and that's when the fun starts.
Oh man, it just becomes like a rave of death.
Right.
Smoke and
poison, hallucinations.
And everybody starts tripping balls.
The ceiling starts collapsing, and I don't know if you have a party
and then drop.
If you have a party that's really into role playing their characters and really into getting into character, an encounter like that can be really fun.
Yeah.
As you ask them to please role play your character's hallucination as they think the ceiling falls on them.
Right.
That could be an interesting scenario for a more natural type dungeon.
Yeah, even though it's just, piercers and dark mantles.
Even though it's just piercers and dark mantles and ropers.
But the sky's literally falling on us. And the dark mantle, it just adheres to
the ceiling.
To the ceiling.
Like looks like something,
But, at least it can cast darkness.
Yeah.
Which, that's not nothing.
No, it's not nothing. And I think that it's another example of a creature that looks like the natural environment. I'm reminded of a creature in first edition, and I'm maybe one of our viewers will be able to help me out, but I don't remember what it's called, but it looks like a tree stump with a bunny on it. And but that's actually sort of the lure of this massive tentacled beast that draws you in because like the player wants to go pet a cute bunny. And it's just, I don't know, there's a history to the game and how all these monsters that develop for it, some of them are obviously drawn from mythology, some of them are drawn from toys that the original creators of the game had, and then others of them are clearly designed for like, man, I've got a party who is just so jaded, they've seen it all, what am I gonna do? I'm going to throw a walking, talking chest that eats them at them, and the stalactite's going to fall on them, and here's a tree stump that's going to attack them. And just like, just trying to find ways to shake up the game and
Yeah.
to keep players on their toes. And that's why I like these monsters.
Yeah, yeah. I completely agree. Do you have any other? That's the thing. We're,
It's a
Trav, you okay with a shorter show?
bit of a shorter show.
Well, before we cut,
I mean, we're at.
Final Fantasy had a class that was like a mime. And there are monsters that can mimic abilities and shit and learn your abilities and shit. Is that something? I don't know. I want to drag us away from.
Doppelgangers can do that.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Doppelgangers can assume your form and read and know your like memories and things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is more like things that mimic natural objects
Right.
or you know,
We're
doors.
not going to go talking about. We don't really feel like we have anything left to say about dungeons.
Well,
right?
that's the
We
thing.
have a whole show on traps.
We're doing a whole show on traps and dungeons. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why like all of this kind of bleeds into that.
Oozes,
We did 15 minutes.
Yeah.
oozes, mimics, and traps are sort of form a trio of shows that are about just a classic dungeon.
I mean, hell, we could even like you just brought up violent fungus and I mean,
Yeah,
even
that's
the
from
myconids and all that.
Yeah, so
bleeds into it.
Even the plant monsters are in there. So I mean, like, for instance, I want to talk about in the trap show, you know, the fact that mimics are a type of trap. You know, we mimic each other, but I don't know that I have anything else to say about these particular type of monsters other than use them. They're interesting.
Yeah.
We're on a dungeon. But like 15 minutes.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about you, but there for a while, like right at the end, it just felt like what else can we say about
What else
these?
can we say?
I kept
I mean,
looking down. I'm like,
That's what they say. They look like other things. Try them out.